at an all-you-can-eat restaurant, and doctors who make money primarily when they do stuff may tend to do more stuff.
When we're doing all of this stuff, it makes you wonder, does that mean we're also making mistakes proportional to the amount of stuff that we do?
Well, that sounds scary.
So first of all, I don't want to scare people out there. Most doctors are doing the right thing and always will.
Alright, but how can it be that the people we entrust to fields who've worked their entire adult lives to learn that fields may sometimes be villains? To get to that answer, you first have to understand that for decades, we've been making a sort of clerical error.
Our research found the methodological flaw in our country's national health statistics. We use a billing code system to tally causes of death from death certificates. And people don't just die from billing codes. They die from medical mistakes, communication breakdowns, overdoses, fragmented care, closed insurance networks, preventable complications, unnecessary treatments. And if you look collectively at this group of problems, let me call it medical care gone wrong, it's got a significant burden in society.
But those complications and oversights and errors, McCary says, seldom wind up on the death certificate.
When you fill out the death certificate, you have to list the reason the patient died, both the direct reason and the underlying reason the patient died. Well, we all knew what the real reason was, but you can't put that on somebody's death certificate.
Why not?
When somebody experiences a fatal mistake, their heart stops, and then you do CPR, then you pronounce them dead, what do you put on the death certificate when it says what was the cause of the patient's immediate death? And that's really what got us thinking, and that's what led to this study, because you end up putting cardiovascular arrest, and then it turns out what we put on the death certificates populates our country's national health statistics. So when the government puts out every year, these are the most common causes of death in the United States. And by the way, that list is a big deal. That list informs all of our research funding. It informs all of our public health campaigns in America. That list is a big deal. So, you realize we're misclassifying medical mistakes as other causes, and that medical mistakes don't even show up on the list.
So McCary and his colleagues got hold of a mountain of data and started digging.
Well, we basically looked at the best available research on the topic from the New England Journal of Medicine and Health Affairs and a big Medicare analysis and something called the OIG report. It was a government report that was independent.
And what they find? Before I tell you that, let me tell you this. There is a famous report put out by the Institute of Medicine in 1999 that set a benchmark for death by medical error. That report estimated there were between 44,000 and 98,000 deaths annually in the U.S. due to medical error. Those are obviously large and frightening numbers. So large and frightening that I've heard many medical professionals insist those numbers had to be way too high. So what number did McCary come up with? At least 250,000 deaths every year in the U.S. due to medical error. 250,000 people. Before we get into the errors themselves, let's think for just a minute about how the story of those deaths was hidden in the data. As we've noted throughout these 3 episodes on bad medicine, a lot of what we take as factual and empirical within medicine often isn't very empirical. That includes how data from clinical trials are manipulated or misinterpreted, and, as Marty McCary argues, it includes how the cause of death is categorized, and that's why he's pushing for a fundamental reform to require that doctors, when they fill out a death certificate, specifically indicate if a medical error was involved. Because how do you solve a problem if you don't even acknowledge the problem? And with medical errors, the problem is both deep and broad.
The medical errors have a complex taxonomy.
That, again, is the Harvard doctor and economist Anupam Jena.
But for someone like me, I would just break them into 2 categories. There are errors of diagnosis, and then there's errors of commission, when a patient has surgery on the wrong leg, or when a patient is given an antibiotic, despite it being well documented in the medical record that he or she has an allergy to that medication, or when a patient receives a dose of insulin that is 5 times as much what it should have been because someone couldn't read a doctor's handwriting in the chart. There are errors that occur in the hospital because of poor hygiene and infectious disease management, where people get hospital-acquired infections.
I've got to think that those errors of commission are extraordinarily rare, though, yes?
Well, you would hope so, but it turns out that they're not. The Johns Hopkins infections.
I've got to think that those errors of commission are extraordinarily rare, though, yes?
Well, you would hope so, but it turns out that they're not. The Johns Hopkins study is actually more about those second set of errors.
So when I hear that, I, as a potential patient, I say to myself, unless you are bleeding heavily or unconscious, just stay away from every doctor and certainly every hospital.
Well, hopefully if you're unconscious, you won't be making that decision. Well, I think you also have to take it a step further and say, okay, well, when a diagnostic error occurs, what is the implication of that? Does it mean that a diagnosis is ultimately made later in a safe and effective way? Well, that's much less alarming.